Thank you so much. Well, it is a pleasure to be with you, and it's a pleasure to be in such good company. You have an extraordinary collection of thinkers tonight. Arthur Sulzberger Jr., Jill Abramson, Michael Kimmelman, David Leonhardt, Shigeru Ban. You have extraordinary people gathered just for one session of this extraordinary conference. And I have to tell you, as a New Yorker, it makes me proud that we bring together people of this caliber every day in this city, and I'm glad you're here to experience it. I particularly want to thank Arthur Sulzberger Jr., who manages and leads this extraordinary institution that is the New York Times. It's something that we in this city have depended on for generations to be one of the places where we get the fullest, most comprehensive, most insightful rendition of the news of the world around us. And it's really a touchstone of life in New York City. And Arthur himself has not only been a good steward of this newspaper, he's someone who gives so much to the community of New York as well, particularly his involvement with Outward Bound, which has made a huge difference in the lives of more than 1 million people, creating an opportunity, particularly for young people, to overcome challenges, find what their potential can be, get rooted in positive values and possibilities. Arthur's been part of that as a labor of love, so I want to thank him for that. I have to say, as an elected official, as a public figure, I recognize the media is going through a lot of change. For us, that creates some challenges. It won't surprise you. It used to be that not so long ago, if there was going to be a critique of the work I do, it would be in the New York Times and other print newspapers. But now, the New York Times is able to raise critical thoughts and challenges, not only in print, but on NewYorkTimes.com, NYT Now, online video, podcasts, and Twitter. My predecessor, Fiorello LaGuardia, never had to worry about a David Brooks tweet. It's a brave new world we're living, and it's one that keeps us on our toes, and that is all to the good. Now, you're considering in these days the future of cities. Let me talk about this from the New York City perspective. I think we are a particularly appropriate place to consider this theme. No city has reinvented itself as many times as New York City, nor as successfully as we have. At various points over the last few hundred years, we've been a world leader in shipping, in manufacturing, in finance, and now in technology. It's been a constant process of reinvention with the times. And when the next big thing comes along, I have confidence that we will be able to be a leader in that too. And this conference is looking at that very reality of how cities evolve with the times and what role they play in our world today. Look at the numbers. About 82% of Americans now live in urban areas. That percentage continues to grow around the world. The estimate is by the middle of the century, almost 3/4 of the world's population will live in urban areas. The significance of cities is far beyond an issue of simply the numbers. It has to do with the meaning of cities. And throughout history, cities have been the place where new ideas develop and the future happens. Ancient Athens, let's take an early example, ancient Athens, where the great minds who gathered in the Agora made historic advances in philosophy and mathematics and science. Or go into a few hundred years ago to Birmingham, England, where the Industrial Revolution began. Cities have a natural advantage when it comes to innovation and economic advancement, and that is that there's a natural diversity. There's a natural coming together of people and ideas. Cities are natural mixers of cultures. I want to refer to a book that I love and I think says so much about New York. If you haven't read it, I strongly advise it. Russell Shorto, in his fine book, The Island at the Center of the World, talks about Manhattan when it was a Dutch colony. And he gives this very memorable description of life in Manhattan in the early 1600s. He says it was, quote, prowled by a babel of peoples, Norwegians, Germans, Italians, Jews, Africans, slaves, and free, Walloons, Bohemians, Muncies, Montauks, Mohawks, and many others, all living on the rim of an empire, struggling to find a way of being together. That epitomizes the origins of this city and how we figured out over generations upon generations how to be together. And in that process, one of the great cultural melting pots took formation. And it became a place of intellectual ferment and creativity. And I'll tell you, it's something that economists note as well. There's something about the sheer density of cities that spurs economic advancement. As Edward Glaser explains in his book, Triumph of the City, innovative ideas and techniques spread quickly when people are in close proximity. That was true of the painting techniques in Renaissance Florence, and it's true of technology advances in Silicon Alley right here in New York City today. So these natural advantages that cities have in innovation and economic growth will only grow in the future. We've entered an age of information, a global knowledge economy in which the idea is king. Right here in our fair city, the president of New York University, John Sexton, wrote an influential essay, Fire and Ice, the Knowledge Century and the Urban University. And he argued that the future belongs to what he called the ICE sectors, ICE, intellectual, cultural, and educational sectors. These are the sort of institutions and job categories that will dominate the knowledge-based economy. And they're just the sectors in which cities have enormous advantages. Given these trends, we seem to be headed for a golden age of cities, super cities, in fact, with increased prosperity and increased job growth. So, that's the positive picture. Of course, you could ask the question, what could possibly go wrong? And in fact, a lot could go wrong, and there are some very real threats to all of us realizing those possibilities in cities around the world. And I want to talk very quickly about two of them. The first is one that I focus on every day in this city, and it's the large and growing income inequality that has riven this city and so many others. Many people speak about income inequality in moral terms. I certainly do as well. But there's a pragmatic aspect to it that's at least as important to me. Simply put, our economy and our social order rely on not having overly extreme levels of income inequality. When the gap between rich and poor grows too large, and when the middle class is eroded too profoundly, the stability of the whole system is threatened. This all makes intuitive sense, and increasingly economists are backing up that intuition. They've pointed out increasingly that the percentage of wealth held by the richest 1% of Americans peaked in 1928 and peaked again in 2007, right before two of our most devastating stock market crashes. Economists are still wrestling with why exactly this is. But the bottom line is that growing income inequality is a real problem and is a problem for everyone. My administration has made combating income inequality a priority. In our first 100 days in office, we secured funding for tens of thousands of children to receive free, high-quality pre-K. This is something we're going to have universally provided in this city in the years ahead. And this will make a real difference in the lives of 4-year-olds who enroll. And this directly connects to the question of income inequality because pre-K has been proven to boost the educational attainment and the life outcomes and the economic outcomes of our young people. Our economic destinies are more linked today to our educational achievements than any time in human history, which means we have to adapt constantly and add more richness to what our young people receive in the way of education. We have to reach them earlier and more comprehensively, and that's what we've started to do here in New York City. It will not only pay off now in terms of immediate improvement in the lives of our children and families, it will not only help to uplift our school system, which has struggled for many years, it will pay off even more so in 20 years and 25 years when we have a better educated workforce and a city more ready to participate in the global economy. In our first 100 days, we've addressed income inequality in other ways. We've taken measures to try and increase wages and benefits. One I'm particularly proud of is a law we enacted a few weeks ago that gives an additional 500,000 New Yorkers the right to paid sick leave. Now, the paid sick leave law is about basic dignity for working people, but it's also another way, a targeted way, a small but important way of addressing income inequality, because when workers get paid, even when they are too sick to work, It prevents them from falling behind further economically. It prevents the kind of economic instability that's become all too common for so many Americans. Similarly, my administration is focused on creating an unprecedented amount of affordable housing, because reducing the cost of housing in one of the most expensive cities in the country is another way of creating greater economic stability and possibility for all of our citizens. These are important steps. They're steps among many, many things that we have to do, but they're a start. I think they send a message to the people of our city that there's an earnest effort underway to address the inequality they see with their own eyes and they know isn't sustainable for the long haul. Let me just make a quick mention of the second looming threat. It's one everyone in this audience, I'm sure, sees and feels and worries about just as much as I do, which is global climate change. We know the danger is real, we know it's growing, we know cities are particularly vulnerable since so many of our world's largest cities and most vibrant cities are located on the water. Unfortunately, after Hurricane Katrina's devastation of New Orleans in 2005 and Hurricane Sandy's devastation of New York City and other states around us in 2012, we've begun to see what the worst-case scenario looks like. A superstorm floods whole neighborhoods, shuts down power supplies, prevents rescuers from reaching those in peril. I'm sure many of you noted, as I did this month, when the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released a sobering report, called for urgent and serious action to address global climate change before it's too late. And it singled out the role that cities must play in this process. And I should note, many of us now leading cities here in this country and around the world understand that it's our responsibility to take some of these matters into our own hands. There's too many situations where national governments are stymied or paralyzed. In many ways, it's at the most local level that we have the greatest latitude, the greatest flexibility, the greatest ability to act. And given the greater concentration of population in our cities, those actions start to add up. And so cities, for example, have an opportunity to lead the world in mitigation efforts to address climate change, to protect against the impact of storms, and most importantly, to address the possibilities of greater conservation, greater use of alternative energy. In fact, I think here in New York City we have an opportunity to set a model with all the public school buildings and public housing residents we have. We're taking aim at them as a first opportunity for energy retrofitting on a grand scale that we know will affect the climate around us, but hopefully also set an example that other cities can follow of localities using the power and the tools at their disposal to make an impact on an international problem. So we're focused in this city. We're focused on addressing the impact of Hurricane Sandy and understanding it was a warning of where things are going and a call to action to take much deeper steps to prepare for what is ahead. So I'll conclude with this. If the subject of this conference is value neutral, the cities of tomorrow, I count myself in the end as a real optimist. I've noted some of the threats. I don't take them lightly. But I've also seen the tools at our disposal. I've seen the amount of will that exists among the public for action. I've seen the sense of urgency that more and more people feel, and the willingness to create, even in the face of profoundly difficult challenges. I'm an optimist, but I know that we have to truly appreciate what our cities have to offer if we're going to fully realize their potential. We have to take on the inequalities around us and maintain that idea of the city as an open place, a diverse place, a creative place, an entrepreneurial place, because there's access for all. I'll tell you, that is what allowed this city to be what it is today, that open and diverse environment you heard just for a moment, that image of New Amsterdam, a place where anyone might find possibility, a place with few boundaries holding them back. That's what gave birth to today's metropolis that you have the joy of experiencing in these days. That's what gave birth to one of the great cities of the world. That formula still works today, and it's our job to apply it in our time. Thank you, and enjoy this conference and your stay in our great city.